Welcome to the Friday afternoon session of the 35th Annual Eudora Welty Writers Symposium. We'd like to thank the Robert M. Herron Foundation for their support. Books are for sale in the lobby, and just a reminder to please fill out your evaluation form. There should be a few minutes for questions after each author's presentation, and our first author this afternoon is Anne Fisher-Wirth. Anne Fisher-Wirth is the author of 7 poetry collections and co-editor with Laura Gray Street of the Echo Poetry Anthology. Her most recent collection, Paradise is Jagged, was published by Terrapin Books in February of this year. Fisher-Wirth's poems have been published widely and received numerous awards, including a Malahat Review Long Poem Prize, the Rita Dove Poetry Award, the Mississippi Institute of Arts and Letters Poetry Award, and 3 Mississippi Arts Commission fellowships. She has also received the 2023 Governor's Award for Excellence in Literature and Poetry from the Mississippi Arts Commission. Fisher-Wirth's current project is a poetry photography collaboration with Willie Rousert titled Into the Chalice of Your Thoughts, which will be exhibited at the Guadalajara Book Festival in November 2023 and published as a book with facing Spanish translations. Fisher-Wirth has recently retired from the University of Mississippi, where she taught in the MFA program and directed the Environmental Studies program. Catherine Pierce, Mississippi's Poet Laureate and a frequent author at the symposium, calls Paradise is Jagged extraordinary and says Anne Fisher-Wirth looks levelly at mortality, grief, and memory and reckons with what it is to be urgently alive, bringing her incisive nuance to subjects ranging from the loss of a beloved sister to Mississippi's parchment penitentiary to our imperiled natural world to the comforts of marital love. In Wooden Comb, Fisher-Wirth writes, I cannot reconcile how the world is sweet, how the world is burning. Paradise is Jagged is too wise a book to promise impossible reconciliation. Instead, it offers a benediction of sorts. Walk with me through this difficult and tender place, it says. Willfully, willingly, gratefully, we do. Please welcome to the stage Anne Fisher-Wirth.
Hi, everybody. Let me reassure you, I've been tested 3 times for COVID. I've been tested for the flu, and I've been tested for strep. I have none of them. This is just an ordinary cussed cold, okay? And now, have you ever seen the movie Moonstruck? Wonderful movie. Okay, there's a moment when Cher is watching La Boheme with Nicolas Cage, and she turns to him and she says, I knew she was going to die, but I didn't know she was going to cough her brains out. So let's hope that I do not cough my brains out. So thank you so much for having me, Kendall University of Mississippi University of Women, and everybody else who has helped to make this such an incredibly fun occasion. I'm delighted to be here for, I think, the 3rd time on such a beautiful day. I really enjoyed hearing everybody else read, and I'm looking forward to this. So I wanted to show you the cover of this book because this is a painting by my mother. And that figures in one of the poems that I'm going to read to you. But I'm going to start with a little short poem called Childhood. I was an army brat, and my dad was in Korea during the Korean War. Childhood. How soft were her hands, stroking our hair as she sang to us, my little sister and me, lullabies that curved through the silvery trees. Our father was somewhere called Korea. He wrote to us that children in crimson overalls ran after him for American candy. Now I know that suffering sows the world with salt, But then I only wondered how the birds slept, feathers puffed up around them, what frogs said with their burbling throats, where the mysterious rivers ran. And a poem called Sunday, Azuihitsu. This is the one that mentions the cover, or it mentions my mother's painting. So Azuihitsu, that's a Japanese form, and I love to work with it. Zuihitsu means running brush, and it's essentially a kind of poem that is many centuries old, and in which you can pretty much say everything loosely connected, you know? So if you are a creative writer and you kind of get stuck, experiment with Zuihitsus. They're very, very liberating, and you can surprise yourself as the poem kind of unfolds and follows its own river course. Sunday, Azuihitsu. Clumps of snow falling across the window as sun comes to the branches of the willow oak. I'm lying in bed mid-afternoon with my beloved, too cold to get up, my feet like chunks of ice, his skin so warm. The snow in clusters caught by light like white petals, and the scatter sound as they hit the deck. In a slither of fur, one fat squirrel running up the trunk, dodging. I'm thinking about my Nebraska-born mother. She rarely smiled. Instead, her habit was pleasant, but in the French sense, plaisant, not only pleasant, but pleasing. When I wish I believed in an afterlife, is so she could know how much I loved her. She overcooked vegetables, put too much salt on popcorn. Her salads were iceberg lettuce with radish slices and bottled dressing that burned your lips. My mother would have painted what I see, the sky faint pink as dusk settles through the trees, snow still lining the branches, darker pink of a few remnant quince petals, pinpoints of light, and a slash of white roof down the hill. She would have painted the scratch, the every which wayness of branches with the light and air surrounding them. Watching her, I would have been drawn to her silence. The Oakland Art Museum asked her for paintings, but she refused. When years later, I showed her my poem, she told me, "These are beautiful, but the soul is like a crystal goblet, easily shattered by the world. You must never publish." Yet later still, when she had to enter assisted living, she tried to sell her portraits in a yard sale, and nobody bought them. "No one has ever cared two hoots about my art," she said. My house is full of her paintings. My children's houses are full of her paintings. My sister's house, her children's house. Every time I lie in bed, I gaze at two of her paintings. All these things held together in the weave of Sunday and memories of Christian Science, sitting in Sunday school, admiring my white scallop-edged cotton gloves with the little petal cutouts, rising to sing the hymns each week. And I believed that if Jesus walked on water, I could too. Sex, I thought, was when two grown-ups lay at opposite ends of a bed with their legs in a V and scooted up till their bottoms touched. Couldn't imagine my parents would do that. They slept in mahogany rose-carved twins, but once or twice I woke them up and found them snuggling. She in a white lacy nightgown, he in saggy balbriggan pajamas. Make your beds, do your homework, sit up straight, set the table, mind your manners. Mabel, sweet and able, keep your elbows off the table. Anne, wash. Jennifer, dry. Both of you run along now. Take your baths and say your prayers. Her body was our safety. Singing voice like slender water. Hands with almond-shaped fingernails softly scratching our backs. God is love, she told us, and you are his perfect child. All those years when he was at war, she wrote him every day. Who were they? My mother soft, my father stiff in his army uniform. Their devotion. She said to me once, when you lived through war, all you want is a family. We clung to her. She had to keep shooing us outside to play. I woke her up one night. I'm afraid of something that starts with D. Daddy? No. Dogs? No. She was quiet a moment, thinking. She put her arms around me. Dad? The next poem I'd like to read is called Freedom's Just Another Word. I'm sure that you guys all know and probably love as much as I do Chris Christopherson's song, Me and Bobby McGee. Raise your hand if you know that song. Good. If you don't know it, go check it out, especially the version sung by the one and only Janis Joplin. Okay, so I take my title from that. Freedom's just another word when there's nothing left to lose. Okay, and this poem also mentions Roy Orbison's song, Pretty Woman. Okay, so I lived in Berkeley when my dad retired from the Army, and my dad died when I was 15 in 1962. And this is a poem about that time after my dad's death. And there's one French phrase in the poem, à bas, which means down with. Okay, so like à bas, you know. Freedom's just another word. Telegraph Avenue, 1963. Before the angels rode through on their hogs and started dealing, the summer Susie Cahill and I pulled on our black tights and fishnet sweaters, lined our eyes like Cleopatra, and strolled down the hill with our rhinestone pipes and Latakia. Abba to my high school social club, Adelphians, second coolest at Berkeley High. Abba to my girdle and kitten heels. Even my mom couldn't make me go sit in a circle. And what did we do? Eat cupcakes? Talk about hair and Frankie Avalon? To dances at the Brazil Room up at Tilden, where wind blew through the eucalyptus and I shivered in my scarlet sheath, pink carnation, wrist corsage, draped listless over my boyfriend's shoulder. You could nurse a cafe latte at the Mediterranean, where the espresso machine steamed and sputtered, and Julia Vinograd, famous bubble lady of People's Park, trailed through the cafe in her velvet tasseled cap and floor-length skirt, selling her stapled poetry chapbooks for $1. And the beautiful guy with his shock of wheat-scorched hair held forth from his table about love. He drew my profile in green ink, leafy tendrils weaving around me and up from my hair. I followed him to his mattress on the floor. Next morning, cold spaghetti from an iron pot. And when I passed him later by Cody's, he started singing Pretty Woman. Back to high school, the breathless boredom, the silent house, my mother grieving. So I was like not a full-fledged hippie, but I was kind of a demi-hippie. And Telegraph Avenue, if you know Berkeley at all, is the place where the 60s happened, you know, leading up to the campus. Wonderful place. Now, a lot of this book is about death, not surprising because I'm the age I am and because we lived through COVID and because there's a world in many wars, you know. But my sister died abruptly in 2019. She was supposed to outlive me because she's the one that had the healthy habits. She was my little sister. So I've written a number of poems about her, and I'll read you two of them. The first one is called And Behind Us Only Air. 10 days from death, she glows, sitting beside me on their deck, scarf wrapped around her head. She's leaning toward me. I have a cold, so I'm leaning away. afraid to give her one more thing to fight. And it hurts that someone seeing this photograph might think I'm avoiding her. She's softly smiling at the photographer, my husband, on this, her husband, on this, my last visit. I feel messy, unfinished. There's too much of me. I'm too given over to life, and all that has been stripped from her. She has gone beyond grief. Not yet is she skeletal, quite. Letters to my sister. Letters to my sister. To Robin. In the final photograph of you, you reach out to cup your friend's shoulder. She's taken a ferry, then 2 planes, and traveled a night and a day to come to you. The light through the great rooted oak outside your window makes your nightgown rosy and the bedroom full of shadows. You are so frail, you've practically vanished. Like the baby robin we found on the sidewalk in Camp Hill when we were small. The wood. We're not weeping people. We don't fall out, don't cling to each other. But when suddenly I noticed the rough wooden cart outside the door at the back of the chapel, and on it, a coffin. Oh, that was the worst. I hadn't realized you'd be present at your funeral. It was okay as long as you were absent. But this, your present absence, your body wrapped, I have been told, in the pale pink linen robe Josh ironed with such love and grief for you. Right there, so close. Then they wheeled the coffin forward, and I came and stood beside it to speak of you. I put my hand on the wood, as if I could touch you. Smoocher-gommers. Today, ahead of stormy weather, Bruce picked irises and drove them to your grave. He texted, "I'll be like the old men in the movies. I'll talk to her, tell her what I've been doing." I texted back, "I've been missing her so much. Tell her smoocher-gommers." Trouble is, I don't remember what that meant. You would remember, Jay. If I drove to St. Louis, you would not come to the kitchen door and stand at the top of the porch steps to greet me. You would not have made pozole so I could eat when I arrived. Your kitchen would not be redolent of hominy and ham. I never told you that when we were kids and you started bleeding, I found the underwear you had buried in your closet. Under a pile of clothes, 3 pairs of J.C. Penney underpants, the crusted stains. I was shocked, but now I rejoice in you, sweet sister, your privacy, your weirdness. You yelled at me when I borrowed your clothes and stank them up with cigarettes. In revenge, I locked you out when my friend came over and you slammed the door to your room and cried. If I could open the door and let you sit on my bed, I would. What remains? I've lost you, you who ate vegetables and climbed mountains, who never smoked and lived so much healthier than I. And I've spent so much time being sad. It's easier than running my hand along the tough sinew of the actual. Wind rises in the pecan trees, and the sun glints through the interstices of leaves. A robin disappears into the forsythia. Across the street, our immaculate neighbor wanders around his yard, plucking infinitesimal weeds. I keep your picture on top of the pile of books by my bed. You're in Paris, at a cafe, maybe 15 years ago, holding a newspaper open. Short blonde hair, sunglasses, tank top, strong shoulders. You are reading, lost in the intricate maze of your thoughts. Never did you look more beautiful. So, as you know, for many years, taught at the University of Mississippi, and I taught environmental studies. And there's this, do you guys know the Ole Miss campus at all? Some of you do. There's this amazing tree on campus. It's a catalpa tree. And if you don't know what that is, you should Google it, Catalpa. They're really beautiful trees. And this is a prose poem called Catalpa. This tree is older than Columbus. 10 years ago, my honors student standing in a ring could barely get their arms around it. I took their picture, hands joined, cheeks against the rough wood. Mostly they loved it. But one guy told my friend who supervised his lab, she made us hug a tree. It was the worst class ever. When I think of the tree as a sapling, my mind enters a great quiet. Before the Depression, the yellow fever, before the burning of Oxford, before the University Grays left their classrooms for the battlefield and died or were wounded to a man at Pickett's charge, and before Princess Hoka of the Chickasaws set out with her people on the Trail of Tears, this tree sank its roots deep and deeper into the ground. Generations moved about beneath its boughs, spoke and loved and died as it grew. And here it is still in the clattering present. 10 years ago, I could walk around it, smell it, stroke the lichen on its bark. If I put my hand into the hollow in its trunk right near the ground, it was always cold, always comforting. No matter how brutal the summer, its dark, mysterious lungs kept serenely breathing. Now fences surround it, stakes hold up its branches. No longer do art majors loll on the benches and smoke under its big leaf shade. A sign warns, no climbing, keep off. Still, every spring, wet, tender leaves unfurl on branches jagged as broken bones, and the tree bursts out in a froth of white petals. And every spring, the preachers line the sidewalk near the tree and thrust their Bibles as we pass by. Repent and be saved, they say. Turn or burn. I want to tell them, turn around, and look at the tree. I used to have quite a collection of those little green Bibles. It's like, please don't ask me. So some of you have probably been to the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum in Jackson. I was there right after it opened, and I found it a pretty overwhelming experience. The next poem that I'd like to read to you is the kind of poem called A Golden Shovel. And that's where you take somebody else's poem, it better be a pretty short poem, and you use each word of that person's poem as the last word of a line of your own poem. So there was an African-American poet, Lucille Clifton, whom I greatly revere. I love her work. I knew her a little bit. She was so important to me. And this is a poem called Miss Rosie by her. And I'll read you her poem and then I'll read you mine. Her poem is this: when I watch you wrapped up like garbage, sitting surrounded by the smell of 2 old potato peels, or when I watch you in your old man's shoes with a little toe cut out, sitting, waiting for your mind, like next week's grocery, I say, when I watch you, you wet brown bag of a woman who used to be the best looking gal in Georgia, used to be called the Georgia Rose. I stand up through your destruction. I stand up. I read that poem in my 20s, and I still can't read it without getting goosebumps all over. It's just a magnificent poem. So here's mine in 3 parts at the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. A Golden Shovel for Lucille Clifton. 1. I am reading the names of the lynched when the guard asks how I'm doing, and I start to cry. In one photo, crowds watch a body burn. You wouldn't believe their glee as the man is wrapped in flame. A father in the picture lifts his boy up on his shoulders. To the mob, it is like a holy war. They're doing God's will, getting garbage off the streets. Now I'm sitting in one of the tiny film cubicles surrounded by images from Freedom Summer, by blown up headlines about the missing men. It is 1964. The bodies, Schwerner, Cheney, Goodman, have been found. There's the smell of death, legs poking from the mud, and deliquescing flesh of 2 other boys found in the river during the search, too long dead to identify. Old grief and guilt like a knobby, rotten potato. How the past peels off when I see the photos or hear the ringing freedom songs. When the guard says kindly, if you want to talk, I can't talk, just flap my hand around. Later, I watch a teacher with her students. In this museum, she says, you will see what Black people, and sometimes white, fought for here in Mississippi. The right to work, to learn, to vote. Your freedoms don't come cheap, she says, for in the old days, the white man's word was law. But how could we walk in the shoes of the man who was lynched for bringing suit, with the man who was lynched for hogging the road, with a woman and her little sons and daughter whose husband, father died because he wouldn't toe the line, like mighty trees cut down, like holy flames snuffed out. I tell myself, no more sitting. Let me walk among those who fought and those still fighting, still waiting. 2. I think of your courage, Lucille, for in 1982, before that dignified white audience, you told how your great-great-grandmother, the first Lucille, was on your mind the night you came to read at Virginia. Not lynched in Virginia like all the others you told us, but legally hanged because they respected her. Next, you said, shot her baby's white father from his horse. My week's little concerns drained away, my papers to grade, the grocery list, the cluttered house. And I saw the crossroads. I saw dust and pines and broom shed, heard clattering hooves, heard him say, for God's sake, Lucille, don't. Or maybe nothing at all. Later, when you came to my house for the reception, silent and shy, I sat on the steps, a scared new hire among the senior professors, eager just to watch as they shook your hand, as you balanced your plate. Saying goodbye, you touched my cheek, told me, your eyes are so radiant. I will remember you. 3. In the photos, jeering crowds surround protesters wet with sweat and coke and ketchup poured on their heads. Their brown and white faces grin at lunch counters. Any pocket or bag could hide a gun. I was the protesters' age, but was not there the summer of burning churches. My mother was a protective, cautious woman who went to church, taught school, who forbade me to go on the buses for Freedom Summer, who used to say she'd die if I married a Negro. What is it like to be a guard here, to comfort white women who weep, to be surrounded each day by the history of suffering, the fire, the noose, the prison whip called Black Annie that made scarlace out of even the best looking back? Not your grandma, not your mother, not your own sweet gal was safe in Mississippi or in Arkansas, Alabama, Texas, Louisiana, the Carolinas, Georgia. What's it like to be a guard? To know that for stealing 5 pounds of ham, they used to give a black man 10 years at Parchman, then to rent him out for convict labor until he'd starve, until he'd be broken. Yet in the darkest corners of Parchman, freedom riders sang and called on each other's courage, on the conscience and heart of the nation. And you, Lucille, paying homage to your own lost Georgia Rose. What was it like to be you? I think of you with love. I stand in this museum knowing that you lifted me up and that you guide me still through what I've done and what I've failed to do. Your kindness and the guards in the midst of so much cruelty, such destruction. Thinking of these, how can I not take courage? How can I not stand up? I'll add parenthetically, there's a long poem in this book about teaching at Parchman, and that's one of the great experiences of my life is teaching creative writing at Parchman Penitentiary. But it's too long to read. It's called The Astonishing Light. In honor of the earth and in honor of everything we're doing to the earth, a prayer, and troops massed at the borders. I was alive while the nations killed the earth. Love grew thin on my tongue. Mostly I kept to my own small life. Not that I didn't care, but what could I do when greed and pride gnashed at the flesh of the world? Quince blossoms made it through the freeze, rose pink on thorny branches, a pleasure, a comfort, and cardinals warbling under the blanket of evening sky. Then a skein, a V of geese crying southward overhead, lit up where the sun gilded their bellies. What matter, I thought sometimes, if we X each other out, the human race? We don't deserve this beauty. So I'm going to read you now 3 more poems. And the first one is a backward abecedarian. So an abecedarian is a poem where the first line starts with A and the next line starts with B and so on all through Z. But this is backwards. So the first line starts with Z and goes back to A. And it's called Jagged Paradise. So it's kind of the namesake poem for my book, Paradise is Jagged. Indeed, paradise is jagged, right? Zing, you're alive, aren't you? X-rays show nothing wrong. Why fight against this happiness? Violets clustering between the bricks on the front walk under the pecan tree, spider lilies, intricate and scarlet. Theo, the tuxedo cat, lapping cream on the porch. Sunlight on the trail this morning warms my love's neck and his worn red shirt. It gilds the bulrushes, silvers the feathery grasses. Quick, look, as we walk, the heron who lives by the little pond rises heavy-bodied into the trees. One rudbeckia, one purple zinnia. Not much else grows where the trail branches off into darkness. Moon tonight is full, sailing around the sky, clouds whipping past. Leaning on my husband, I crook my neck to look up at the sky. Keep him safe, moon and sky. Keep him in your care. My guy in his jeans and hiking boots, his olive-colored shirt and the belt tongue that keeps curling. In my squeaky voice, I sing him, Il y a longtemps que je t'aime, which means I've loved you for a long time. How old we're growing together. Him with his toenails sharp as knives, gnarly eyebrows, me with my twisted toes. We love the things we love for what they are, wrote Frost, and it's true. Every cicada sings us closer to winter now. Darkness soaks the grasses, pulls beneath the trees. Come here, little one, whoever you may be. The day and night ripen blood-red berries of sumac, dogwood, roses. All the leaves are mottled and stained. Amen. Breathe in. It's late October. Now, I read you some, sad poems, but there's an abiding source of beauty and comfort in my life, which is Thich Nhat Hanh, the great Zen Vietnamese practitioner of peace. Okay, and raise your hand if you know who Thich Nhat Hanh was. Some of you do, the younger ones don't. He was a youth during the Vietnam War, and he was exiled from Vietnam because he was trying to bring both sides together to make peace rather than take one side or another. He lost a lot of people, but he devoted his life to compassion and meditation. So he went into exile in France and founded Plum Village, which is a Zen monastery. And since then, it has spread all around the world. So there are Zen monasteries all around, and one outside Batesville, Mississippi, of all crazy things. And that's because a lot of Vietnamese people settled in the Delta and in Jackson after the war. And they wrote to him and they said, we want a Sangha, which is a religious community. And he said, if you will buy some land and build some buildings, I will send some nuns and monks. So it's a very, very beautiful place. And I've gone there and I've taken students there and I love it very much. Thich Nhat Hanh, his other name is Thai, which means beloved teacher. That's what he was always called, Thai. Was somebody who kind of really has borne me through, some hard times just reading his stuff and practicing what he talked about and so on. He died a couple of years ago after having a stroke, and he died in Vietnam. But his week-long funeral celebrations were broadcast, on video. And I watched a lot of them. And then my husband and I also went out to Magnolia Grove for one evening observance. So this is a poem, just a sec, that has an epigraph from Shakespeare's play, The Merchant of Venice. And that epigraph is, the quality of mercy is not strained, it droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven. Thich Nhat Hanh, or Thai. Rain taps the walls gently, puck, 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 then slides to the deck, filling this gray morning where I lie beside my husband in our bed, warm and new from sleep. It soaks the shining mosses, makes the resurrection ferns grow plump again. And I am thinking of Thai, whose funeral rites I watched live streamed from Hue. Thai, beloved teacher, whose face as he lay on his bier held such gentleness, whose monks and nuns in saffron robes vivid as marigolds filled the meditation halls and bowed in quiet prostrations. The struck, vibrating, singing bowl, calling us each time back to the breath. I sat breathing, watching, as in a vast procession, chosen ones dressed in gold and scarlet carried his casket heaped with chrysanthemums to the fire. And I thought, how could I ever be afraid of death? This morning I woke still wrapped in his blessing, merciful as the rain. And I'll end with a short poem that I wrote right at the beginning of COVID. We live near the Oxford graveyard. And I was down there one day and I saw this wonderful stag. So this is a poem in tiny little sections, and it's really for all of you. It's called A Young Stag at Dusk. White tail flicking, eating flowers heaped on a raw grave. He raises his head to watch us before he vanishes slowly into the trees. Outside the kitchen window, my peace roses ride on arching stems like moons in a lead white sky. All year, earth holds them. I ignore them. Night thickens among the branches of ginkgo, maple, willow oak, cherry, redbud, and the thicket of bamboo that surround this wooden house. Sometimes I am afraid. At 3, I knelt on the back seat of my mother's car and looking out the window said, there's so much to see and so little time to see it. Or so I've been told. It's like that now, watching the leaves. Bread rises in the oven. May the stag sink back into the forest. May the petals drop on the grass. Whoever you are, may you be at peace in this great silence where only the birds speak. So thank you. Thank you. So I would love if anybody has questions or anything, if you just want to talk about anything, I'd love that. Yes. I'm an eco poet, which is to say, to me, the other than human world is every bit as significant, every bit as full of meaning as the human world. And yet so much of our consciousness is involved in just interacting with other humans or thinking about human affairs, you know? And so there's a whole, so I'm, my huge anthology that I co-edited is the Eco Poetry Anthology, which is 625 pages of nature and eco poetry from the time of Walt Whitman up to about 1960. And now I'm involved with the same friend of mine in doing volume 2, which is going to be poems from 2010 up to now. And there's so many people who are thinking in different ways about the fact that we overlook the other than human world. We use it, we abuse it, we exhaust it, but it is such a source of meaning and beauty. And it has so much right to exist in its own right. Do you know what I mean? Rather than just to be kind of the agent of our own purposes. So I do use a lot of natural imagery. During COVID, I spent an awful lot of time on my porch, and we have these big trees in the front yard. My pecan trees are a major player in this book, you know, but I also love flowers. I have a lot of pots of flowers and birds. Somebody mentioned, man, this book has a lot of birds, because bird song, right, is, you know, a way of giving us beauty and a way of communicating with other birds. And it's all around us if we just pay attention. So I would say there's not a reason that I use so much natural imagery. It's just that that's how I ground myself. That's where I find a sense of deep meaning in being a human being, being alive. Thanks for that question. Yeah. Am I done? Huh? Anybody? Yeah. Uh-huh. Now I know that suffering says the earth with salt. Yeah, that's what was done to, sure. Isn't that what was done to Carthage? To destroy Carthage in the, right. And is that the Punic Wars? Is that the Punic Wars? Yeah, so that's an image that comes from ancient history. After the final defeat of Carthage and the city was destroyed and everything, the victors came and sowed the ground with salt so that it couldn't regenerate. So it's just a metaphor about, you know, suffering sows the earth with salt. I mean, I was raised in the army and my dad was When I was a newborn, he had just finished spending the entire war in the South Pacific. And then when I was a little kid, he went off to Korea. And so I was not knowing about war as a little child, but it was very much in the background of my consciousness. So like, you know, in school, we used to sing, My Country 'Tis of Thee, Sweet Land of Liberty. I would never sing the line, Land Where My Fathers Died. Because I thought, man, my dad's going to drop dead in Korea if I say these words, you know? So there was this awareness of a larger world and the awareness of the destruction. I mean, look around the world right now at the destruction that is being inflicted not only on human beings, but on the land, on the ancient trees, on the rivers, on the fields, do you know? So this enormous suffering sowing the earth is salt. Thank you for asking that. Yeah. Yes. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Man, I don't know what it means. Except that, yeah, okay, I'll read that poem really quick if we have just a minute. What page is that on? Okay. So some years ago, my husband and I have really good friends who live in France, and La France Profonde is deep rural France in the middle of the country. That's what they call it, profound France, you know. And we went to this little village, and then we walked out from the village like one midnight. And we were on this trail in the mountains, and here's the moon, and here's this drop off. And we're walking along, and then we come to a little cottage. And the cottage, this little stone cottage, was there from who knows when. And I just had a strong fantasy of somebody who had lived there, you know? So here's the poem. It's called Wood and Comb. I want to go into a far country, get away from this knowing, rediscover light on the water and the odor of time, sun-warmed and acrid on the hillside, to go with him, to find that stone hut on a trail outside Camporier, where we walked one long ago midnight away from the village to watch moonrise across the mountains. That abandoned one-room hut where a woman I imagined once combed her hair with a wooden comb. My heart has grown numb. Today, buttercups blossom in the muddy fields along the parking strips all over town, and my students calmly discuss what forms of life will exist beyond apocalypse. I cannot reconcile how the world is sweet, how the world is burning. Next door in the trees, a little bird is chirping at the night. So as an environmentalist, I will just say, y'all students should not have to discuss what forms of life will exist beyond the apocalypse. That should not be a question that young people have to consider. Okay, so thank you guys so much. Thanks for listening.
That was wonderful. Thanks so much, Anne. Next up, we have Halle Hill. Halle Hill is from East Tennessee and lives in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. A graduate of Maryville College in the MFA writing program at Savannah College of Art and Design. She is the winner of the 2021 Crystal Wilkinson Creative Writing Prize and was a finalist for the 2021 American Society of Magazine Editors Award for Fiction. Her short stories have been published in Joyland, New Limestone Review, Southwest Review, and the Oxford American, where she won the 2020 Debut Fiction Prize. Hill's collection, Good Women Stories, was published by Hub City Writers Project in September of this year. It has received rave reviews from the Boston Globe, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Publishers Weekly, and a starred review from Kirkus. Disha Philyaw, the author of The Secret Lives of Church Ladies, calls Hill's characters curious, messy, and determined, and Hill's fierce and dazzling pen lets us feel every ounce of their complicated desires, every mistake, every realization, every triumph, every tragedy. This is a fantastic firecracker of a collection, and I'll return to it again and again. Please help me welcome Halle Hill.
Good afternoon. Bear with me while I get connected to the projector, but I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you, Kendall. You can see that okay? Wonderful. Well, thank you again. Thank you, Mary, for the lovely introduction. My name is Halle Hill, and I'm here to talk about my collection, Good Women, which came out almost a month ago to the day, a little over a month ago. So this is my first book, and I've been on a tour from Baltimore all the way to Mississippi. This is my first time ever in Mississippi, and after a 10-hour drive, I can say it was worth it. I've really enjoyed my time here so far. So I'm gonna talk about my collection primarily through two stories, The Truth About Gators and another story called Her Last Time in Dothan. I think I'll read two snippets from those stories that I think really speak to the collection best. But before we start, I really want to begin with a quote from Jack Kerouac that I borrowed from my friend and the writer Ashley Bryant Phillips, which says, "No fear or shame in the dignity of your experience, language, or knowledge." So can anybody tell me where this map is, where it's located? Anybody? What? Thank you. Yes, this is the Appalachian Mountain Range, and so it's a huge spanning space, and I like to point that out before I talk about my book, because it's an area of the country and the world that is heavily mystified, but it expands so far. A large majority of it is outside of the South, even spanning up into Canada. But my story really takes place where the Gold Star is. My personal story and the stories in the book. Good Women follows the 12 lives of everyday Black women in Southern Appalachia and East Tennessee and the Western North Carolina border. And so in writing this collection, I knew that I really wanted to challenge the ideas of Appalachia and also give women their space to be seen. So I always like to mention that. So the first story I'm going to read from is called The Truth About Gators. The story deals with a young woman who experiences an act of violence, and she tries to reclaim her experience through an act of violence herself. It deals with a lot of questions of faith and bodily autonomy and God. And so I'll begin with that. I am on a journey ever since I gently stabbed Mr. Jimmy at the barbecue last month. See, his baby toenail kept hanging out the front side of his gator sandals, the nail buttery and curved under like an old orange peel. And I sat there staring at him in my misery and remembered all the times he found me after church in the parlor growing up, and the times in the vestibule after service, and I guess the times in the women's bathroom on the 3rd floor too. Every Sunday at Brunswick Eternal Harvest Pentecostal went the same. I looked at his feet while he switched over to me and my mother. Erlene, don't you look so heavenly, so fine? Oh, Jimmy, she'd sigh as they hugged in a saintly way, her arms making an A-frame above his bald, dark head, then settling on his shoulders. Her chest always grazed his faded glory dress shirt, her nipples hard, alert. Then she'd pinch my side and scoot me to him for a hug. Come here, baby girl, he'd always say, smelling like dollar store Dracar Noir. And I'd stand there, stiff as a board, my eyes in a soft, raged glare, my body all too familiar with his puncture. Mr. Jimmy always hugged me too long, his mouth smelling like mothballs above me, his crotch resting like a mound of wet cotton balls against the whole of me. On the day of the cookout, he really irked me. At 23 years old, I thought I was grown enough to let it go. It only happened 7 times. And besides, my anger with him stunted me from my blessing. But Jimmy still irked me. He was a ghost slip on my body. He scratched the silver naps at the back of his head with his pointer fingernail, and I watched his skin fall like ash on his shoulders. We had gone all out. New York strips. We got 2 for $1 at the Food Lion. Are there Food Lions in Mississippi? Y'all got Food Lions? Yes, no? No? Maybe? Okay. Jimmy said he'd fix them right for us. When I first saw the dandruff flakes, I was sure he'd wash his hands, sure he'd scrape the gunk out somehow. The white cottage cheese looking shit sat thick on the underside of his long rounded nail. But he didn't scrape. He didn't dust his hands off on his pants. He reached over the grill with his bare hands and flipped the meat. Then he licked his lips at me. So I lost it. clawed an ice pick from an igloo cooler, and made a few indentions on him. I don't remember much else, but now I see Rabbi Cadence. The health department is 2 doors down, a woman tells me, at the community center, 1 door over from the synagogue. I stare at her and the edges of her lace front wig, and I wonder if she buys her hair from the Asian store on Magnolia like me. I'm here for therapy. I need her to know I am responsible, as this was my only sensible option. I keep myself accountable, either 12 sessions or the hospital. She blinks twice. I ask if she knows where Rabbi Caden's office is. I ask the white way, changing my voice to upper middle class NPR style vocal fry. Brighter A's, shorter vowels, tightness on the T's. I try to show I am in college and can count. She gives a no-teeth smile and points behind her. I smile with all my teeth and gums. See, I have them all, and walk quickly. I worry I smell like cocoa butter. In today's session, I am learning about my attachment style. Last week, Rabbi Cadence told me my disorganized style makes me act in an anxious, compulsive manner. In response, I made the mistake of telling Rabbi Cadence my dad moonlighted as a public access televangelist before he died. Now he lays on the God stuff pretty thick. All his breakthrough analogies are from the book of Samuel. See, Nikki, I've been thinking, and I think I've got you pegged. He rests his fingers on his lips, sits back and crosses his leg. You're like King David. You know about him? Remember him and Bathsheba? I stare. You have delayed reactions, then you melt. Rabbi Cadence laughs at this. I've got a David in my office. Help me. He laughs and reaches out to grab my hand, but settles on my bare thigh. I laugh back, my hand flopping on top of his like a dead bass. Our eyes meet until I check the clock. We have 20 minutes left. There's a cold sub sandwich on his desk. The deli meat sweats, and I smell the mayonnaise turn. My stomach growls while he does his little wrap-up routine, checks in with me, and checks to see how my anxiety is going. And remember, the Valium can be habit-forming, half a pill if ever, and never with alcohol, only ever in emergencies, only ever if you really need to leave the present moment. His voice trails while I check the dirt under my nails. Back at my apartment, the chicken salad I left out earlier is probably starting to turn too. It's summer, and by now the gnats are laying eggs in the neck of the barefoot wine bottle I left uncorked on the balcony. When I get home, I think I'll swallow it anyway. Big gulps. And then I think of the rabbi's hand on me, dry and heavy and confident, not basement damped like I hoped it would be. I think of his feet too, if I can imagine them correctly. I've never seen them bare. Maybe I'd suck the toes. Then I start to wonder if Jewish men wear gaiters. I wonder if Rabbi Caden's baby toenail curls under too. Okay, for the next story that I'm going to read, it's called Her Last Time in Dothan. One of the things that excites me the most about writing fiction is being able to blend nonfiction in the genre. I started out in my MFA program writing nonfiction, and I quickly learned I was terrible at it. I had no sense of how to write stories about my family, and my brain always wanted to add on to what was truth. During my time in graduate school too, I was also haunted by a story of something a family member of mine experienced. In a town in Tennessee where I'm from, the city is connected for miles through greenways, miles and miles. It's beautiful. They go by the river, they go by lakes, it's gorgeous. But I had a family member, unfortunately, witness a murder. When he saw the murder, he was naturally an eyewitness, and so he had to go to the police station. He was so hurt for the woman who unfortunately lost her life. He wanted to help her get justice, so he gave his account. Months later, during the trial and when things were wrapping up, he had to come back in and give another account. And even though he was there, and even though he was a first source eyewitness, multiple things that he thought he saw did not happen. It made me think about the ways that our memory fail us. Our recall may not be accurate, but what is always right are probably our body memory, somatic memory, as well as emotional memory. And fiction allows you to explore that truth. And it helped me be a more honest writer. I may not be held to the same standard of a type of truth that a nonfiction writer is, but I am held to hold up emotional truth. And so this is a lot of what Her Last Time in Dothan is about. But first, I'd like to introduce you to my kin, my family, my grandmothers. In the bottom picture, that is my great-grandmother, Luvella Juanita, who was born in East Tennessee. She had 8 children. She was a Gemini. I loved her dearly. Above that is, again, my great-grandmother, Luvella, in the middle. And on both of her sides are my grandmother, Lillian, and my great-aunt, Dolly. Her name is Jimmy. I lost my grandmother to dementia. And so I wanted to write a story about a young woman who watches her mother lose her mother. And the experience of watching that and seeing when an ancestor that you love that's in the flesh is preparing the transition to whatever comes after life. And so while the majority of my collection, I'd say, is 10% based on lore from my matriarchs in my family, this is 80% true, 100% from the heart. And I wrote it in honor of my grandmother and my great-grandmother. Her Last Time in Dothan. Uncle Otis's heart is swelling like a balloon. It'll burst and he'll die soon, Mama says. Mama talks on the phone to Aunt Loretta about it on the way down to Dothan. I told him to lay off that coke, Roberta. I told him I've been off it for months now, probably a year. He just don't listen, girl. Mama keeps it on speakerphone because she likes 2 hands on the wheel, even though she expects me not to listen. But in some ways, I think she wants me to hear. I Googled it before we left Dothan. In the word, it's the place where Joseph's brothers dropped him in a well and sold him into slavery. In Alabama, it's the peanut capital of the world. Second to that fame was the cotton. I watched the white tufts out the window. They look soft enough to hold. Aunt Loretta gets to bullshitting, says Grandma is doing great, better than ever. Mama sucks her teeth in when she hears this. It's been the 2 of us ever since Daddy got the job working in corporate at Weigel's. First Black man that high up. Ever since we've been alone together, me and her. But that's okay. It's a part of the sacrifice. We've got more than ever now. A big brick house and a cul-de-sac with a gas fireplace that comes on with the flick of a switch. I've got my own room with my own phone and my own shower. I changed schools this year too. Now I wear a collared shirt and wool uniform. I perm my hair. I met somebody. At every stoplight, Mama mutters meditations her Reiki master gave her. I can release this. I am whole. Again and again and again. She's got a life coach as well. He recommended she take a new approach to her fear around dementia. She's been taking this Buddhist class he recommended at the local library. It's about grief and non-attachment. When we get to Dothan, we pick up Aunt Loretta and her half-brother, Uncle Otis, and take them to eat at Outback Steakhouse. All my other aunts and uncles call him the bastard. They hate him and swear his mama took their daddy Melvin away, but Aunt Loretta kept a soft spot for him. Aunt Loretta is Mama's cousin, but it's rude for me to call her by her first name, and Cousin Loretta sounds too country, so I call her Aunt. Same for Otis. And when I look at them in the rear view, I can't help but think how opposite they are. Aunt Loretta is as skinny as a twig and as yellow as a piece of butter cake. And when Uncle Otis closes his eyes to blink, I'm certain if it was real dark at night, I couldn't find him even if I was looking. We hope to take Grandma with us to Outback, but Aunt Loretta says she's staying at her friend Janie's house for the evening. She scratches her head behind her elbow. Well, no, she scratches at herself behind her elbow. I count 4 gold-plated shrimp-looking rings across her knuckles. She's wearing perfume and it stinks, cheap white diamonds. They wanted to watch MASH. She looks down when she says this. I can tell Mama doesn't buy this, but we're hungry and it's been a long trip, so she doesn't press. In the booth, I focus on the appetizers. I shove pumpernickel bread gobbed with white butter in my mouth and feel around for my track phone in my pocket. Mama wants us to know everything and wants to know everything new with Loretta and Otis. And Uncle Otis keeps grazing Loretta's hand when they reach for the bloomin' onion. Loretta doesn't swat his hand away, though, just scoots from him and says something about how she's so hungry she could gobble a horse. Mama and her catch eyes before Loretta acts stumped by the menu again, taking her time, as if she's really that curious, as if she wasn't a woman who knew exactly what she wanted to eat. Loretta orders the surf and turf, cooked medium, and a double darkened stormy. She eats it all, smacking down even the tails. Uncle Otis gets a T-bone, medium rare, and his skin looks just like it, gray and pockmarked. I hear the gristle tear while he cuts it. Both of them scarf down their food like they haven't eaten in days. They spoon in loaded mashed potatoes while chewing bites of broccoli drenched in A1. I'm getting nauseous. Loretta keeps commenting on the fancy foods, saying how broke she is with big puppy eyes, even though she has a fresh roller set. All the while, Uncle Otis nearly knocks his plate from the table, sawing that musty steak. You have to go against the grain, he grins. The meat doesn't move. I grab a chip and try to load the maximum amount of spinach dip on, only to drop the glob beneath the table. I grunt, then poke around on my phone under the formica. It lights up, nothing. Even in the dimmed restaurant fluorescence, Uncle Otis doesn't look good, and it's true. The cocaine is making his heart swell. He'll be dead 3 months from now, and we won't go to the funeral. But at Outback, he has Aunt Loretta and Mama and me laughing. Otis rubs Loretta's knee and circles slowly a few times. He goes over the kneecap like he's fluffing the skin there, plumping it. I keep watching Loretta, hoping she'll say something, and my face turns hot. She smiles at Mama, full of quarter-colored caps, takes a sip, then moves his hand higher. The waitress brings the check, and Mama takes out her thick American Express. Ooh, you something now, ain't you? Loretta hoots. Girl, whatever. Well, in that case, what do y'all got for dessert? Uncle Otis almost splits in two. He stares at the middle of the credit card. The silver soldier on the front looks annoyed. He knows we don't got it. Whatever you want, you can have. Order the whole goddamn menu. Mama drinks her painkiller and shakes back the ice. She doesn't cuss like that at home because her life coach said it's crude. A foul mouth robs a cheery heart, invokes the evil eye, he reminds her. Thank you for tending to Mama. You know I wish I could. She grinds on her ice pellets for a minute. I can't believe she's almost 87. Otis looks Mama all over, then he stares her in her eyes and smile. He has little dimples I didn't see before. You just never age, do you, Roberta? Looking as beautiful as ever. Ha, it's only concealer and fillers. Don't let me fool you. No, it's that good heart of yours. He looks down her shirt. It's used Burberry she bought on eBay. You never forget us po folk down here, huh? Nigga, please. Mama looks at me and bugs her eyes out. I stuff more buttered bread and squeeze my knees together. We end up ordering one of every dessert with coffees, and Uncle Otis belches the rest of the meal. He smells like a dumpster. I glare up at him, but he doesn't notice because he's eating cheesecake. It's late. The table is wet with drip from our drinks. Us women are ready to go, but he gets back to tearing up that old raggedy piece of steak, looking down, saying softly, "Excuse me." Me and Mama stay at the La Quinta in the center of town next to the Confederate bust of General Beauregard. Usually we stay at a Hilton Garden Inn at least, but we don't want to seem high sedity. I like it though. The room is big, 2 queen beds and lots of Neutrogena French milled soap I press to my nose and smell. I watch CSI Miami on the bed while Mama looks for roaches and cameras. She doesn't find either, but there is mold in the back corner of the shower, so she calls down on the white phone to tell them about the spreading spores. They say if we don't say nothing about it on Facebook, they'll give us the room for free. So she ends up telling me to stand towards the front of the shower where the mold isn't when I wash up. Later, I keep the soap to my nose while I bathe, staring at the black slime. I've been talking to Corey from my algebra class on my track phone at night after Mama goes to sleep. On the last day of 7th grade, we traded numbers, but I haven't said anything to anyone about my grown folks' business. He tells me he can talk in the evenings after 9 when his minutes boot up. Last night, I checked to see if Mama was asleep. Then I started texting him. But I stopped and pretended to be asleep when I heard some whimpering. It went on forever. Before school let out, Heather told me Corey gave her his number too. But I don't care. What we have is real. Loretta lives on the corner of Poplar and 3rd. We go to her house the next day to pick up Grandma. She looks dead. And the house isn't nothing to look at neither. It sags in the middle and the front porch is all but broke off. Overgrown begonias crowd the front door. In the yard, I see 2 pit bulls chained up by an oak tree. The names Beauty and Daisy are embroidered in pink, the color of Valentine's, on their collars. When I hug Grandma, I'm afraid I'll snap her. She looks all of 90-something pounds. Her dentures poke out of her mouth, and she doesn't know who we are. Aunt Loretta is on food stamps and buys all her sustenance for Grandma off her WIC voucher. But she can't afford a lot, so Grandma is stuck eating Hungry Man, XXL meatloaves, and Great Value meal replacement shakes. Aunt Loretta takes us inside and offers us some tap water. We both say no, and I go to sit on the couch. Judge Mathis is on. Grandma sits across from us in her rocker. She stares off in space with her mouth open. "Hey, Ma," Mama says. She reaches out to hug her. As Mama holds her, Grandma pats her shoulders like a stranger, not a daughter. Her face looks frozen, stony, like someone who's had a lobotomy. Thank you. So before questions, I just need to also say some thank yous. Thank you so much to the W for having me and putting me up and being so gracious. Thank you for Kendall for having me as well. I also always like to thank the librarians. I don't know if we have any in the room, but librarians are everything. They helped me do the research for this book. They helped me research all of my education practices. I thought I was a pretty good student, and then I had to write a thesis, and I was like, I don't know how to research. Help me. So just a thank you to librarians. I also have to just thank the poets. One of the best pleasures of writing short fiction is that you can train your ear to learn about cadence and style through poetry. The title of my book, Good Women, is a riff off of Lucille Clifton's Good Woman, her collection of poems and essays, and it even opens with a poem from that. So I'm in awe of the poets, and so I just have to thank you. So I'd love questions if anybody has any. Yes. Mhm. Yeah. The question was about writing truth with a little bit of fiction, how my family has reacted. I'm grateful to say it feels more a little bit like fiction with a little bit of truth, or at least that's what I'm pitching to my family. My family has been really supportive. When I started writing the collection, my mom asked me if I was scared, and I said, yes, I'm terrified. But I said the other part, though, is my book is dedicated to her, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, my great-great. And I said, if I can get this book to my editors in time, what will happen is that this book will be in the Library of Congress, and so will their names. And that will outlast me. It will outlive all of us. And I think that that matters more. So maybe my family is frustrated, but I also deeply tried to honor them. And they are the ones who taught me the stories. So they have been unbelievably supportive, and it's just my honor to share about them. So thank you. Yes. I do. I love the Dothan story I read. I love the truth about gators. Even though there's violence, I think for that young woman, good for you. Good for you. But my favorite story is probably the last story, which is called How to Cut and Quarter, which deals with a young woman who has been working in the big city of Atlanta. She moves home to Collegedale, which is a small town outside of Chattanooga, after her father, who was a pastor, passes away, and she inherits the land, and she has to kind of have a home going. And what I love about that story is it combines all the things I feel like I'm a nerd about. I have a background in religious studies, so I get to write about this Black woman having a spiritual experience at the end of the book, which I enjoyed deeply. But I also get to write in a story about Seventh-day Adventists. I grew up Adventist, and I felt very othered by that, but I get to kind of reclaim that story and the history. It's also the story that is most connected with the natural world in my book. It talks a lot about this young woman in grief really hanging on to nature to heal her. And so that was just a very special story to write. And that is my favorite. Thank you. Yes. Mhm. Mhm. Things happen like in your first draft, or when you left having these books, or do you? Thank you for that question. So the detail work is probably the funnest part, and they actually come from logs I keep. I have an image journal, and if I can't journal or write down my day, every day I try to take stock of something very, very ordinary or bizarre that I saw through details. I'll give an example. The beach I go to is Wilmington. I love to go there. And last time I was there, I saw a couple in matching white New Balance tennis shoes walking down the Riverwalk and sharing one singular can of Coke. And they were so content. And I was bothered and elated. Bothered because share my drink? Never. Backwash, I couldn't believe it. But then two, in my observation, it said a lot about the couple, their sense of simple pleasure and just the delight of a good Coke on a hot day. And that detail work is actually something that is helping me write the next thing I'm working on. So the detail work is very intentional and it just comes from those logs. And the best part is once you write a couple, you will end up having hundreds that you can pick from. And so that's where that comes from. Thank you. Oh, yes. Yes.
And, you know, hearing a lot of images, like he's saying, visceral response.
Yes.
Functions, you know, create a visceral experience.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. One of the people that I enjoyed studying while I wrote this book is I guess he's a somatic practitioner. His name is Peter Levine maybe. He writes about, I was curious about studying about trauma and the body and epigenetics, and he talks about how you get it out of your body and all this stuff. But he is someone who just talks so much about like how our body does hold our truth, you know? So that was fun for me, even when writing about some of the difficult things. And the food stuff, once someone said, your book is so gross. And I thought, thank you. Because aren't we gross as humans? I know we are, we're beautiful, but we're also strange and pretty grotesque. So I think it all goes together. So thank you for seeing that. I think that's it. So thank you so much.
Okay, if we could get everybody back in, we're going to go ahead and start. Okay. Claude Wilkinson is a critic, essayist, painter, and poet. His poetry collections include Reading the Earth, winner of the Naomi Long Madgett Poetry Award, Joy in the Morning, Marvelous Light, and World Without End. His fifth and most recent collection, out from Cascade Books this year, is Soon Done with the Crosses. Wilkinson's poems have appeared in dozens of journals and anthologies, including Atlanta Review, Poetry South, a Journal of Delta Studies, the Oxford American, the Southern Review, and the Southern Poetry Anthology. His criticism has explored such diverse artists and photographers as Maudie Schuyler Clay and James Vanderzee, fiction writers John Cheever and Flannery O'Connor, playwright Charles Fuller, and poet Etheridge Knight. He has been a provost scholar and also a John and Renee Grisham visiting Southern writer in residence at the University of Mississippi. Other honors for his poetry include a Walter E. Dakin Fellowship in Poetry and the Whiting Writers Award. Scott Cairns, author of Slow Pilgrim, The Collected Poems, says Soon Done with the Crosses combines great wisdom with generous learning, serious linguistic play, and uncommon formal accomplishment. Wilkinson's new collection awakens in me the possibility of poetry as necessary, well-considered speech, an indispensable conversation that promises both communion and community. May it be blessed. Please welcome Claude Wilkinson.
Good afternoon. Thank you to Kendall for inviting me back. And I'm happy to be here for the second time in person. My title, Soon Done with the Crosses, is taken from lyrics in a spiritual that was recorded by Alan Lomax during the 50s and 60s. And this particular song was sung by the Georgia Sea Island Singers. There are two epigraphs at the beginning of the book which foreshadow the overarching theme of the book. The first is from a song entitled One of These Days by the Georgia Sea Island Singers, and the lyrics state, "We soon shall be done with the crosses, we soon shall be done with the troubles of the world." The second epigraph is from a song that was recorded by Johnny Cash entitled "Do Lord," and the lyrics state, "I've got a home in glory land that outshines the sun way beyond the blue." Logos. Most days now, the news is not good. So I ask myself, how can scarlet and hyacinth macaws still tolerate one another on the same clay lick and the same of lakes bearing mayflies and loons? How is it the stars and moon yet sleep and wake together in peace after these many millennia? And why by now hasn't Saturn seceded from its crowning glory of rings? In the hot blue August noon and green sinuated shade of pin oaks is some of Heraclitus's strife and change, the earth burning itself up in a phoenix flame to revive again from ash. I'm thinking of Hopkins being torn between loves, the cosmos of Duns Scotus and Ignatius Loyola, in skate and in stress, more often at odds than at rest, while another of my backyard's little dramas unfolds as to how it all works. From an abandoned armadillo hole, a chipmunk peeps, quivers as if hearing a hawk's famished skirl, then scampers a few feet toward groves heightened with late summer light, but then stops, quivers, and darts back to his pit, over and over till I too bear the burden of his life, feel the heart thump under an ivory plumed breast, perched somewhere atop this deciduous world, timing its quick descent. The next poem is reminiscent of a poem titled Annus Mirabilis by John Dryden, which was set against the Black Plague in Europe. An evening in Annus Mirabilis. So startled and pleased in the abundance of bluebirds I'd seen this spring, especially passing the rubbish heap on a hushed road I love to drive just before sunset, that I refused even to consider any toxic reason for their brilliantly turquoise wings. What looked to be a gold bleached thrush may have been only a glint on dappled leaves, but not so of the largish floppy umber rabbit, zigging past the stagnant pool, impastoed by algae, dazzled with tornadic gnats. Each iridescent moment scanned in strokes of damselflies, the fantasia of tweeting hidden among elms by this time approaches white noise. A little later here, and a familiar whitetail would be out. Both coon and possum would be creeping through their twilight haunts, and likely as not, the beige blade of an owl slicing into the iniquity of night. Maybe for one somewhere in Holland, it's the yellow therapy of sunflowers under a low cumulus ceiling, like that of a Dutch master's sky. But for now, besides such beauty as this, piled with refuse of people's lives, the landfill reminds me of Chaucer's Troilus when he says, sweetness couldn't be known without knowing also about the bitter. No wonder I marvel from craters up mounds, rising toward fearless clouds, drifting for what I imagine as empyrean places of rest, far beyond our current pestilence, and we who are pawns in the Olympian game of asses and elephants. In this brief piece, I can still give thanks for the mild longing of doves and for the season's many fireflies, more than I've seen since I was a child, when they hung like berries, almost asking to be plucked from thick Mississippi air, to sacrifice their angelic lights for us to streak our dusky faces in fluorescent glory, as if come with bright revelation for earth. After James Dickey's Cherry Log Road. Here, I'll use second person, since you were my Doris Holbrook of sorts, not just because of your like first names, though we were perhaps not so young and not nearly so surreptitiously reckless, but because it's you who for some reason come to mind when thinking of the time when I mostly longed to be wreckage. Back then, what place didn't seem as secluded and clandestine as any car graveyard, with each new day thrumming its own sweaty encomium of need. Here, I should probably make up something about remembering one particular evening and the special brightness of a July moon, and how an unexpected comet sprayed across our ebon sky at the most opportune moment. Maybe allude to some voyeuristic theme of crickets singing and offer a discrete metaphor of acerous air and the starry penumbra of sweet gums mingling. I'd be guessing, based on nothing really, if I said you enjoyed listening to the surge of the ocean, or that your favorite color was indigo. Here I could lie about almost loving the mellifluousness of your voice, lie about your voice being mellifluous. I might be able to get away with comparing ours to a few mythical romances, while nothing so over the top as the strength of our infatuation prodding us to poison, or one of us jumping off the county's highest bridge into a rushing body below when what was between us died. Here, like in Dickey's poem, where he's far more enamored with the stories of rotting hulks of automobiles than with his nearly anonymous farm girl of the summer, who doesn't speak or do anything other than what he wills and then leaves. Like in that poem to which I return every so often, alas, you also are being left forever by my rusting memory, speeding toward oblivion up a never-ending highway of the past. I'm sure at some point in life, all of us have been there and done this. Listening to Voodoo Child while imagining Sisyphus instructing Jimi Hendrix for his eternal labor. Once from that sulfurous estuary, he's directed toward a wailing pyre of material things to watch his custom Stratocaster burn and reverb without antic magic or scores of screaming, mesmerized girls. Now, little more than a tumblebug, and not one for another's self-pity, always regretting his own accursed Corinthian spring that he bartered for the secret of one of Zeus's liaisons. A silent Sisyphus points to Orpheus, whose songs had filled even birds with envy. Alone there, mourning just outside perdition's gates over his beloved Eurydice. And then to Tantalus, who hasn't eaten in eons, standing famished and damp, though right below the crimson tragedy of ceaselessly shifting grapes. To Persephone, who for half of every year, from among the harmony of zinnias and roses, must return as her fleshly self for Pluto's clammy lich, and to sallow Charon all day, every day, ferrying the dead, collecting each obelisk and ferrying the dead. After this introduction to sorrows, he's probably told how things get worse, that from time to time, he's likely to hear an echo of bongos or the strumming of sitars as phantom pain of worldly longings. And when his futility is to begin, he's led next to the base of a mountain where Sisyphus's rock and eternal rolling waited, then charged to chop it down using only the edge of his hand. Birds that serve as still lifes. Indeed, the prerequisite is death. And though the both of these I'm recalling are common enough crows, may be found in a winter field, then hung by the swarthy stems of their legs, their scapulars ruffled from petrine crucifixion, and their satin primaries masterfully splayed in Andrew Wyeth's wash and ink study. None, neither pink-necked fruit dove nor emerald damask cuckoo, has ever seemed too precious a sacrifice for our lasting admiration in one fashion or another, whether in a milliner's abstraction of flight, in Audubon's ironic conservancy, or Daedalus's plan of escape. Was it some avian part of the angel which Jacob wrestled for, something divine in birds that's always been our deepest desire? I've confessed my own early trespasses of quelling the radiance of wax wings and red starts, along with all the many others untitled and forgotten, not for the exaltation of making pictures to be adored in museums, but just to hold and to behold lives lived so much closer to heaven. On the aquarium in a doctor's waiting room. There were those I recognized instantly, such as the bleeding heart tetra and moonlight gourami. Some, I believe, are a golden type of glowfish and a crew of bottom feeders which look like tiny carp, never rousing from their inclination, even if one of us in boredom disobediently taps the glass. Supposedly, there are ways to tell if your fish are happy. When they swim freely about the tank, when they rise quickly for feeding, and when they don't hide in turrets of their ornamental castles or spend hours on end cloaked among garlands of fluorescent wisteria. Once I had a student become angry because everyone in class thought her poem derivative of Godot. But as I recall, without the possibility of anything Freudian or Jungian or any symbolism of faith, though her tree was leafless and there was this interminable waiting without action, as is the case here, where we are long forgotten, except to be called up for paperwork and co-pays, then return to orange and amethyst peripheries of always astonished eyes, slipping back and forth through their clear, uncomplicated place for what seems time immemorial, till all of us are mostly thinking of our world's beautiful distractions. Shell of a terrapin. A dusty, broken hull just outside the yard that may have been the yellow-bellied or red-eared kind familiar around these parts. Its flesh long ago pecked out by buzzard or crow is yet enough to say, maybe it's right that I don't forgive myself for battering them into shards in my youth, so that now even words like terpsichore, even that muse of dancing and singing, can almost become a homophone of guilt. But they were the enemy, the enmity back then, Lucifer's let loose among forbidden fruit, our Eden of tomatoes. Often we would actually find them, painted monoliths, reared on hind quarters to nibble each of the brightest globes. I've since read that terrapins aren't affectionate, are antisocial, and will piss on you if picked up. Still, and in spite of their filching, it feels that they deserved better than to be stoned like whores caught in the act, as if we ourselves were without sin. Roadkill. In the equitable light of Thoreau, as he mentioned more than once how the slain make provisions for the living together at the welcome table, I try to fathom their excessive abundance instead of just their mangled mass and Venetian blood splattered like a Pollock painting, the whirl of intestines pushed outside, snakes mashed beyond recognition into rattlehead copper moccasins, the barn owl whose sole ghostly wing beckons with gusts from each passing car, directing everyone's travel. I remember Walden's order of untenable compassion and think of freshets clogged with frogs, which would be similar to the curse on ancient Egypt, if not for accident. But it's still a kind of eclipse to witness the starching mink, a once quick vixen's glazed eyes, or a kestrel's stricken plummet, still that same unnatural dark that followed when Macbeth murdered Duncan, whose horses then went wild and began eating each other to signal something awry, as do these many broken bodies dissolving into puddles of jewel blue flies. Pale green Victorian. In its heyday, a house set up on a hill, which I recall being yellow, trimmed with white. There, it seemed to me, none would ever fall ill. I remember the colors being so bright because I always noticed when passing by how they captured and held the breath of sunlight, especially from our spring and summer sky. Turrets and shutters made it a fairy tale castle where it felt impossible to die, in whose yard you'd never find the words for sale, stabbed in grass near a blossoming citrus tree, nor spot a missing shingle or rusty nail bleeding down the clapboards for others to see and suspect something inside might be wrong too. I imagine the owners blissful and free, unlike myself or anyone that I knew. After winter, it seemed their jonquils were first to open, although this may not have been true. Almost 50 years later, the thing that's worst is the paint being dimmed from pastel to pallor, the burden of being filled with unquenched thirst. I'm not saying the house has gone to squalor, but I never saw the roof clustered with leaves, nor even considered mold in the cellar. Now there looks to be some damage to the eaves, and the whole thing could be mortgaged to the hilt. Still, it's not any of this per se that grieves me more than the truth of Psalms on how we wilt nearly as quickly as wildflowers in drought. Childhood ponds become memories caked with silt, while promises of happiness peter out, like embers of what we once thought life could be, before finding ourselves on some fateful route where we are left with the gall of fantasy. It slightly humorous but vexing event occurred when I was trying to save the title of this next poem that I'm going to read. The title is In Medias Res, and my computer wouldn't let me save it. Said that title was already taken. So, you know, after weeks and weeks of trying and numerous updates, technology had finally allowed me to save my own title, and to think there are people clamoring to turn the rest of the world over to technology. In medias res. So this is it, the middle, the center, what's finally at the heart of the matter, the transfigured hub, the crux come at last after ages of anxiety ab ovo. That equidistant point in one's circumference of life, a so-called crisis state, when skies can be as cornflower blue as Vermeer would have loved, with evenings of doves surely fond of one another, when marigolds haven't lost their radiance, plovers on the beach are still charming to watch, and yet there's something about it all that's not there any longer, or there's something not now as it was expected to be, that's sought in stored photographs, in ancient texts of letters from father and mother, about nothing more concerning than an old neighbor having died, or too little rain for the garden. Without any warning of rogue hairs and foggy thought, of the body becoming oblivious to its former delights, but as if by Homer himself, perhaps merely meaning not to bore, So with no backstory of Leda having been taken by Zeus or their double egg consequence of Castor and Pollux, of Clytemnestra and the Helen scourged by beauty, one is seemingly just plunked down into some ongoing war of regrets. Tribulation. Buffalo grass gonna come out tonight as if by the light of the moon, and I late with my herbicide again. Neither have I yet tried filling with kerosene, as some advised, an armadillo's trench beneath an old propane tank, nor have I strewn a consensus recipe of mothballs to rid the soil of moles. And what can really be done about the little volcanoes of crawdads? For the time being, those damnable ants nudging their Babylon across what was to be such a holy city are both calling and priority. At the garden center, I'm impatient, anxious over myriad labels to study, to find whether I need granular or liquid, borax or something else, and whether it's for fire ants or pharaohs or carpenters. Learning words like eusocial that I feel I'll never need. The store's lone other customer, who I'm sure won't bother me, looks as though she might have been a debutante some 50 years ago. Vexed among poisons, all claiming to be the best, my guard must have seemed lowered for a moment, the veil of my temple rent, just enough for her tremulous counsel. Asking if I had found anything that worked, she complained that she too bore enmity for those terrible mounds rising like adobe clouds with every soaking rain, that they were killing her cherished bougainvillea, which I believe she mentioned she had only seen one other similar to it somewhere in Venice or Spain. About the armadillos, she'd had it and determined to shoot the next one to tunnel under her condenser. But she agreed on the answer of mothballs as a talisman against moles. She quoted me a dollar amount paid to get raccoons, then squirrels removed, but said she wouldn't be able to pay again since her own and her husband's medicine had become so expensive, since he was now dying from 2 kinds of cancer. The garden. Checking a plump quince and all the other dew-spangled fruit, what was once given to be a joyful tending without thorn or stress, fell to my father and to his father before him with obstinate clods and ornery mules, with cutworms and oftentimes parching droughts, with hardy weeds and blazing delta heat. What was meant to be merely thumping cooled melons amid the adoration of courteous animals somewhere along the inheritance became shooing brazen crows and smashing thieving terrapins. Though there was still the grace of harvest and yet what was at most to be an exalted body, only moistened in the mild, perfect firmament, scarcely resembled my exhausted father, stumping behind a rusty middle buster, his clothes black as transgression from sweat. Thanks. If you have any questions, I'll entertain them now. If you don't, we'll go on with the program. Okay. Silent guilt. Where? Oh, okay, okay, yes. My love for world literature and the biblical imagery is just such a part of my life. You know, I've been reading it all my life thus far, and since I've been able to read. But how they connect is, you know, just a part of the creative process. You know, there is a myth involved in the mythology part of it, and then for some people who consider the biblical aspect of it myth as well, there's a connection there. I try to keep the connection as separate as possible, although, you know, in terms of my seriousness about it, but you know, sometimes they're just combined in the imagery like that. So, you know. Anybody else? Oh, yeah, Halle. Soon done with the crosses. Mm-hmm.
Are there any hymns that was written in a way that was so inspired?
Yeah, the recording that I mentioned by the Georgia Sea Island Singers, it's great. It was recorded by Alan Lomax, as I said, and he made a series of recordings. Some of them are prison recordings, and but this was a group that sang hymns. And you can actually see them performing some of the hymns if you go online and search the Georgia Sea Island Singers. And so those, but my love of music, I listen to music most of the time. You know, there are very few things that I do that I'm not listening to music. Writing is one of them because I want silence when I'm writing, but just doing most other things, I'm always listening to music. And so whether it's hymns or spirituals or gospel songs or blues or jazz, you know, rock. Yeah, I read the poem by Jimi Hendrix, and I really like his music. And so, you know, and that poem just the poem that references Jimi Hendrix, that just kind of came about. And the question that you asked about the things connected, I don't know how that works other than just, you know, just God gives it to me, and I'm a conduit for it. So you know, I never would have thought that I would be writing a poem about Jimi Hendrix and you know, mythology like that, because there's not necessarily anything about the lyrics of the song that you know, would connect to the myth of Sisyphus, but if you're familiar with the beginning of the song, that was the ending of my poem, because he begins, you know, I stand up next to a mountain, I chop it down with the edge of my hand. So I began thinking about Sisyphus's punishment being rolling a rock up a mountain and it rolling back down, pushing a rock up a mountain and rolling back down. And I thought, well, I wonder what Jimi Hendrix's punishment would be, you know, and so Sisyphus became his guide, and the rock and roll connected because he's rolling a rock, and Jimi Hendrix did rock, and if you want to call it rock and roll. And so then I thought about, well, what would his punishment be? So Sisyphus leads him to the mountain. Now he has to chop it down with the edge of his hand. So again, you know, how it connects is, you know, beyond me. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes. Huh? I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Oh, firefly. Oh, you've never seen a firefly? Okay, some people call them lightning bugs. Have you ever heard that term? Never, okay. It's a beetle, but there's a part of the abdomen lights up. It's supposed to be a signal for mating, and it actually lights up like a light when they're flying around. And although it's normally used for that, there are some cannibalistic fireflies that mimic the mating light. And when the firefly shows up to mate, that firefly eats it. So, you know, so there are two kinds, but both of them are fireflies. But anyway, the lights are usually green or yellow, and they just fly around and lighting up, just like blinking Christmas lights or something like that. So, and what we used to do as children, I'm ashamed to admit, is some children actually capture them and put them in jars and put holes in the top of the jars and kept them like lanterns. And some more hedonistic children use the light just smear on themselves, and they would light up for a while. So, you know, yeah. Anybody else? Okay.
Thank you, Claude. I'm taking over because we are to the point in the program, which is one of my favorite parts these days of the Welty Symposium, when we get to invite some of the new voices in Mississippi writing to the stage. Our Ephemera Prize, I realize that we're in our 9th year of awarding the Ephemera Prize to high school students. And I would like you guys all to give a round of applause again to Claude Wilkinson and also Halle Hill. And that was because they were our 2 judges for the Ephemera Prize. We had 44 entries from around the state, and it's always a difficult task, but a joyful task to read all of that great writing and select the winners, and 5 winners and 3 honorable mentions. I'm going to go ahead and ask our honorable mentions, if you're here, to come forward, and I'll give you your award. And our winners will actually read from the stage. So our first honorable mention is Crislin Lance for the poem Melodies of Life. Is Crislin here? Yes. Our second honorable mention is Claire Rizzo for the essay, I Miss Most Those I'll Never Meet. You can put it. Either one. And I believe our third is not with us today, Amelia Whitaker for the story Carvings from the Wind. A round of applause to our 3 honorable mentions. I know you're dying to read their work, so I can tell you that our prize anthology is already online. So if you go to the Welty Symposium's website, mu.edu/prize Welty. Click on Ephemera and Anthologies, and you'll be able to read all of our winners and our honorable mentions, but in alphabetical order. And I'll ask each of our winners to read their work. And they'll also receive a $200 prize. First will be Georgia Bailey for the poems Death and Too Soon.
My first poem, Too Soon. He had light brown hair, the most beautiful smile. He caught everyone's attention. He was stubborn, but had the kindest heart. No matter who you were, he was always excited to see you. He was everyone's best friend. He was spoiled rotten, but he deserved it. He died before his 6th birthday. He lived a short life, but he loved every bit of it. That poem was about my dog Clarence. He died a couple of years ago, but I wanted to write a poem about him because he helped me through some really tough times. I was going through some stuff. So the second poem, Death, it's about a character from a book called The Book Thief. It's portrayed from the scene, the character of Death. Death and chocolate, they don't mix. I watch from a distance, never getting close. It's not an option. When I get close, life ends. Beginning to end, observations were made. Distraction, my true grace. Be calm, be wise, be smart. She was just a girl with a book. Years had passed, but it was her. Misfortune? Yes. I wanted to apologize. I couldn't.
Our next prize winner, and by the way, they're all winners, not ranked, is Amelia Bosarge for the poem Becoming the Witch.
Becoming the witch. I became the witch in my isolated fortress, brewing concoctions with the scarce clemency I was given. I became the witch on the gleaming shore, eyes pouring salt water into the sand, watching great galleys glide menacingly my way. I became the witch around the dining room table, feeding hospitality to brutal soldiers, wine to monsters in exchange for their company until they proved that they were unworthy of being forgiven. I became the witch in the pigsty, staring grimly at my past trudging in front of me, sloshing around in their own waste where I exiled them in retribution for their cruelty, still too damaged to even take pride in my power. I became the witch in the arms of a warrior, almost forgiving, almost healed, almost trusting as he engulfed my brain in wonder and knowledge, spilling out stories like the fountain of youth, taking my tattered soul and feeding it Coius's sweet nectar, thirsting for more with every word that he spoke. I became the witch in the wake of grand ships, watching my heart sail away from me shamelessly, leaving me only with the burden in my stomach, a growing dread gnawing away at my immortality, a regret so heavy that my knees became one with the dirt on which they knelt. I became the witch in the depth of my isolation. A crying babe forced into my arms sooner than I was ready, child sucking more life from my breast than I was capable of giving. Love was not enough to combat all the baggage that I carried. I became the witch in the wake of a hero. He became legend and I became myth, wasting away with our child who built a battleship, ready to leave me the same as his father. I became a witch in my isolated fortress, honing magic to conquer the mountains of my grief, turning evil into swine and lovers into heroes, transforming herbs into potions and soil into lions, turning desolation into eternally growing power. I became the witch in all my undeniable strength, spiting all of the gods with my glory. Thank you.
Next is Anthony Bradley for the poem Atrophied Ambition.
Atrophied ambition. On this day, the 7th of September, a meager man, withered by many winters, sits sleepily on his sofa. Little luminescence trickles through the lodge, sunken far in sylvan forest. Too timbered for favorable travel, he solemnly heeds his secluded psyche. Without friend or family, leaf trees lose their tint far faster, and Stygian sky strips a sunless spell. The bygone man beseeches his woes into bare air.
Next is Ava Grace Snowy for the story Morning Glory.
So I'm lucky enough to say that this is my second ever Ephemera Prize, and I really just wanted to thank MUW for taking a chance on me last year and again this year. You guys were the first ones to say that my writing was more than a pipe dream, and now it's a big part of who I am. So I just wanted to really say thank you. This piece, Morning Glory, is kind of framed around my mom. About a lot of things that I write are framed around her, and she's here, so don't embarrass me. So I'll get started. The more I dig, the less I feel the blisters resting on my palm, the small pieces of wood pushing themselves into the space between my skin and the blood rushing deep underneath. I can't remember how many hours I've been out here. The 5-gallon buckets I brought out with me, now filled with the last of the season. Vegetables that shouldn't have made it this far in the summer with the sun blaring down on their stalks and the rain that never seemed to show its face. My own face, now painted in reds and dripping down like the underpainting awaiting me inside. A new box of oils right next to the easel, something left to do. I can feel my skin, sun-kissed, now burning with the beating of the Mississippi sun on my shoulders, dirt caked under my fingernails and shoes I've long since abandoned at the edge of the field. Row after row, I pull up the last of the okra and the snap beans as the red clay pushes itself between my toes, coating itself over calluses from years of practice, years of digging up. And once all the viable plants were picked, that's when the real work began. Each plant hanging bare and holding to the earth like a child clings to its mother. I tried coaxing them, pulling gently where the green met the ground, hoping for at least one to budge. These plants that I'd stuck in the ground not even 2 months ago, now just as stuck as the century-old oak in the front yard, roots deeper than I could have ever imagined. The kind that were never intended to be seen by human eyes, at least until they were closed. The only way to get rid of roots that want to stay is to break them. In the same way I would plant a sapling, breaking the thread-like roots in my hand so that when they grew back, they could grow back stronger. I took the shovel, row after row, stabbing at the ground, each plant eventually growing weak enough to pull and soon thrown out of the field into the already too tall grass. It felt like digging, the process of sending the spade back into the earth. It felt like killing, the way you take a hunting knife to the shirt seams of a deer. It felt like rhythm, the kind that only the earth has heard enough for it to matter. It's when I'm knee deep in the purple whole peas that the strings of the snap beans start wrapping around my ankles. These mothering vines now being treated like a common weed holding tight to me. I don't want to think about why this is happening. In a way, I knew it was coming. I could only wonder how long the land would keep me here, or maybe how long the earth would wait to drag me down deep. My left hand reaches for the spade, my right reaches to stop it. I start to give in, grabbing a handful of soil and dropping it over my reddened thighs. I reach for the vines and start to pluck the morning glories that have started to grow in tandem, arranging them around my crossed ankles. I think I'm burying myself, but you can never be sure about these things. I can see the pond from here as the world folds in around me. Maybe it's too selfish to think that way. I can see the geese landing in the water, flapping their wings behind them as the world closes in around itself. The tomato plant's spoke starts to scratch its way against my back, pulling me up to my feet. I had left the tomato vines alone, too ripe to pick this late in the year. Now the ones I had left were oozing and scarred, small things crawling in and out, calling the wilted red fruit home. The seeds and juice run down my arms as the plant presses itself against me. The morning glory is now wrapping around my wrist and pulling my hands out to my side. The sun is setting in the west. I don't know if I've ever stood still long enough to watch the first hues of pink start to meet the indigo of the east. I wonder if my sister will find me first in the morning as the sky paints me in the same hues it does now, pulling me from the darkness. Or maybe my mother will see and watch as the first mother takes me back. I wonder if she will weep or cling to my earthly body from where it hangs, if the earth will come for her next when she comes for the last row of plants that I haven't reached from here. I don't regret the earth taking me back. She had every right. I do regret not getting to take this last burden from my mother. I can hear the goats bleating behind me, hungry for something I can't give them. The horses brush against the barbed wire, testing the line between them and the way to the end of the sunset. I wonder if my mother will hear them calling her. I hope she remembers the way back home. The morning glories brush up against my ear, weaving themselves into the twin braids running down my back. I can almost make out what they're trying to say. And as time passes slower by the second, a bundle of peonies and briars atop my head, I can't help but wonder if I brought this upon myself. The past few days of ripping the moaning bodies out of the once tilled red clay, whipping away at the okra to leave behind the bare plant and the seed pods for harvest. Every time I take, all I give back are the withered plants worked past the point of exhaustion. The mud in between my toes and the ground beneath my heel have felt every step, every hoofbeat, every heartbeat. The sweat that dripped from my brow, the scarlet blood that dripped from the dead chickens, leaving a small pool in the gravel, the sickly sweet summer wine my sister spilt off the back porch. I feel it seep into my skin. There's only a little bit of light left in the sky, almost all stars. And as I reach a state of peace, the morning glories begin to grow in my mouth, weaving in between crooked teeth, filling my lungs with indigo star-shaped petals. And I let the leaves cover my eyes. Thank you.
And our fifth prize winner is Iris Sue. Is it Sue or Shui? Shua. Okay, Iris Shua for the essay Speech Delayed Yet Purpose Undeterred.
Hi, I'm Iris, and this is my essay, Speech Delayed Yet Purpose Undeterred. I didn't start speaking until I was 3.5 years old. It wasn't from a lack of trying. My journey with language began in kindergarten when I let the other kids shove past me with sticky hands to the multicolored alphabet rug for story time. As I sat at a moon-shaped table, I listened to how they chattered and gestured at the air, filling the space with tall tales of their families, their pets, and the adventures they planned to have in the playground each afternoon. I vaguely nodded whenever they spoke to me, afraid to respond in case a foreign sound slipped out. Before I could ever hear the story, though, a slender woman with a Canadian government badge, Miss May, knocked on our Technicolor classroom's door. The other kids turned to me with thin, raised eyebrows as she led me out the door, barely touching my hand through the long corridors until we reached a secluded office. Under fluttering fluorescent lights, she slid various flashcards, their bold phonics clashing with cartoon illustrations across the rickety, lopsided card table. As she methodically sifted through the cards, drilling English pronunciations into my malleable mind, I couldn't help but think of my father, who at night, desperate to code syllables from my pink and perpetually puckered lips, spooned soup into my mouth while simultaneously mouthing Chinese characters, attempting to feed me words too. It felt like I was living a double life, and one day Miss May sensed my knit brow, furrowed from learning 2 words for everything and rewiring my thought process all the time. "I know you have a lot in you," she murmured, "but no one will know the fantastic thoughts floating in your mind unless you voice them and do it well. I didn't miraculously learn all of English after she said that, but I realized I needed to do everything I could to catch up and prove her right. I had something in me. When I went home, I begged my mom to take me to the library so I could spend hours reading every story until I could recount each one on the car ride home. From the rainbow fish to chicka chicka boom boom, I wrapped my mind around the infinite combinations of letters forming words and words forming the abstract ideas on the page, whether they were the depths of kindness or just block letters climbing up trees. In my room, I shuffled through flashcards until my parents had to shake me from my trance-like studying to remind me about dinner. After my parents set out the bok choy and egg drop soup, I snuck glances at the labels on our food packaging, no longer needing my father to redirect my attention to the words around me. When I started speaking, my victory tasted as sweet as maple syrup. But after I learned how to speak, it took much longer to love to speak, as well as realize how language could be a gift. I had something to offer in the infinite give and take of human discussion and discourse, and I didn't recognize the disservice I did to myself and those around me by not speaking my mind. After Miss May had pushed me off the diving board into a pool of the English language, the least I could do was use my voice and spit out the gulps of water I swallowed. In later years, I pored over every opportunity to learn and love language. I dived through the dictionary, absorbing pronunciations and definitions to become a state spelling bee whiz. I joined the speech and debate team, memorizing stories and speaking extemporaneously on any topic, from the need for high-speed rails in America to Amelia Bedelia's whimsical commentary, eventually winning prizes for my performances. I wrote for the school newspaper, discussed texts in seminar classes, and made a point to spread my lips wider to address my friends as y'all. And somewhere in the process of finding my voice, I became confident in my identity too. Every place I traveled to, every community I joined, I thought I had to choose between my past and the future, sacrificing my accent to match others. But accents are sticky, and they've clung to me like my kindergarten classmates' hands or Mississippi mud. My voice still carries the upticks of Chinese, the nasal elegance of British English, and vowels as wide as the Mississippi River. Sometimes I still fall into the trap of silence, believing my thoughts won't significantly contribute to the discussions around me. Whenever that happens, I remember the girl at the moon-shaped table, revolving around her classmates' conversations without being a part of them. I remember the girl who didn't know how to speak until she was 3.5 years old. I remember how far she's come, not only gaining her voice, but learning how to use it well. If she could learn how to balance her identity with her languages, surely I can speak with purpose too. Thank you.
Clearly, Mississippi writing is in good hands for the next generation. Thank you all for coming this afternoon. I may see some of you this evening at the Welty Gala, and I hope to see you all again tomorrow morning, beginning at 9:30 with our last panel. Have a good evening and hopefully a great rest of our weekend together. Thank you.